I was originally planning on reviewing the League of Villains some point in the future, but with this idea came into mind all the while that I have enough time left until Summerpalooza 5 Steven Universe Marathon arrives at the end of this month. I've decided to compare the League of Villains from Jimmy Neutron to an episode that has similarities, even though that episode is less longer in comparison to this episode, which is 44 minutes long. And if it wasn't obvious enough, it's When Losers Attack, which is from Very OddParents, and I was originally going to talk about the third Timmy and Jimmy Power Hour before the marathon officially starts, but let's be real, I had less interest into talking about it. So when it came into mind of this episode and the Jimmy Neutron episode, this is literally the only way I'm ever going to have a Jimmy Neutron and Very OddParents video that has nothing to do with the Power Hours in some other capacity, if you want to include the Nicktoon games. You pretty much know the plots of these two episodes, well, mainly one special and the episode from Very OddParents is mainly about the villains teaming up together in order to take down the main protagonist, well, mainly one protagonist from the Very OddParents, while mostly taking down the majority of protagonists in the Jimmy Neutron special, even though that Sheen, Libby, Cindy, and Carla are tagging along in order to save the world from the villains, but the point is that the plots of these two episodes have huge similarities, and there really isn't a lot to discuss, mainly in the fact that one element is much more better than the other, and that's mainly the fact that the Jimmy Neutron villains, while not getting along in the same ways as the villains from the Very OddParents, can sum up on the fact that the antagonists of the Very OddParents episode are only 3. And no, I'm not fooling you. If you saw the title card of the episode itself, Vicky is part of it, but in reality, it's mainly Crocker, Floop, and Dark Laser, which, in all honesty, judging of how that this episode came out in Season 8, which was in 2011, then it sums up a lot that the Very OddParents hasn't been the same 5 years after Jimmy Neutron came to an end. You can look at this episode and look at the Jimmy Neutron episode that is the finale of Jimmy Neutron, and they're completely different shows than how the Very OddParents were when Jimmy Neutron was airing. Like, every time I look at this episode, even though that this is supposed to be a style that is supposed to be its own thing, the difference is that they went way too overboard with the style, along with the amount of times that they were planning on canceling the show, even though it wasn't the case when it comes to Nickelodeon standards. To tell you the truth, guys, every time I watch the final episode or finale of Jimmy Neutron, which is the League of Villains, it sums up a lot that it's changing for the better in comparison to the Very OddParents. Well, it may have good morals when it comes to the oil seasons, mainly from Channel Chasers, but considering that along with Wishology, along with other planned finales for the Very OddParents, it really makes the Season 8 episode When Losers Attack really pale in comparison to this, especially since that they just took inspiration from this episode and thought about, we can make our own League of Villains, which, for me personally, it sums up a lot that not every show is going to capitalize the ideal and do the execution much more better. People may say that the finale of Jimmy Neutron is a little claustrophobic when it comes to giving you reminders of past episodes that they reference, mainly the Love Potion, the Prehistoric episode, among others, but I really don't feel like that this was meant to be a finale, since that this along with Season 2 and Season 3 episodes, the majority were produced in 2003, and I'm not making this up. One of the major criticisms of this finale is mainly the antagonists and not cooperating with each other for the sake of how they were dumbed down in comparison to how they were in their own episodes from the series, which I would agree on how they work together in order to take down a protagonist while not getting along, but at the same time, it kind of sums up the nature on how they just don't know each other completely, and when it comes to their alliance, let's be real, they're much more cooperative antagonists when it comes to coming up with a plan in comparison to the losers from the Very Odd Parents, which is inconsistent of 3 instead of maybe more than 10 in this finale. Granted, the antagonists in this can be a little out of character for how they were portrayed in their own episodes, mainly their interactions, but if you were in this position when it comes to being a villain and you have to work up with other villains, it's realistic for yourself to be portrayed in a way where you're not really familiar with other people that are really different from others. And with this being in a villain standpoint rather than a hero standpoint, this is mainly the anti-Avengers before the Avengers became a thing in 2012. Granted, there were more parodies, not really parodies, but elements that happen in other shows, but this is literally the biggest example of what I've seen when it comes to these antagonists working together. Besides, in comparison to the Very Odd Parents episode, where there's only 3, it really feels more unrealistic and not in the lore of the Very Odd Parents, which is no surprise considering that this is the episode where Crocker and Floop meet the first time, other than the third live-action film, which sums up everything onto how there is zero direction of this episode, and they only put these elements together for the sake of making the episode work, which, in all honesty, at this point, the Very Odd Parents have jumped way too many sharks to the point that this episode is the shark that they just jump and people just didn't notice. I would give When Losers Attack the benefit of the doubt when it comes to centering around one protagonist, since that Cosmo and Wanda can't be able to use the magic due to the predicament that they'll in when it comes to the eclipse that they explain in this, but as far as I'm concerned, that also includes multiple problems on how they're just introducing these things, and then when they just throw the wars out the window, it just makes everything go on autopilot and not the good kind. Because for how Timmy is portrayed in this, he isn't the same Timmy who interact or fought Jimmy in the Timmy Power Hours. And let's be real, this sums up everything onto why I place Jimmy's episode or finale first in comparison to this being in second. And it isn't because that this episode came out years after the finale of Jimmy Neutron, even though that's mainly my intentions. It's mainly the fact that Season 6 and onwards of the Very Odd Parents are completely different. That really damages any credibility of what they can do because they don't even try to make those executions work. I'm fully aware that the Very Odd Parents is supposed to be fast-paced and they repeat the same jokes over and over again. And with this being 22 minutes in comparison to Jimmy Neutron's finale being 44 minutes, I'm willing to let that slide, but with the episode itself being fully aware of itself on how stupid it is, it sums up everything onto how that they just didn't really put any passion into having the villains team up together in order to be legitimate threats against the protagonists along with the godparents. Because, let me be real with you, if this episode happened way earlier in the franchise, I'm pretty sure they will have made the execution work. Granted, they will probably have to take liberties in order to prevent world building situations when it comes to having the anti-fairies not making any contact with the humans, but it's literally the only way to make a plot of an episode of the antagonists facing off the protagonist and the fairy godparents that are not being shown whatsoever. An interesting premise. But considering that the Jimmy Neutron episode takes itself seriously when it comes to everyone else, it really makes me to believe that if they took this element and have it aired on the same day as the finale, which aired in 2005 because Nickelodeon airs cartoons literally in any order that they want, it would probably make me see that the Jimmy Neutron episode would still be a superior version over the Fairy OddParents episode, but I would have give credit towards the Fairy OddParents episode to at least trying its own thing. Since the League of Villains is the finale of Jimmy Neutron, even though it wasn't meant to be, they were building up elements for the following season if they managed to have the DNA production stay in business. And every time I look at this, there are so many possibilities, even though that there are a few moments that I didn't enjoy. But that's basically the charm of what Jimmy Neutron has in comparison to the Fairy OddParents that made an episode years after this. Like, you can say all you want that Jimmy Neutron may been into Season a lot in Season 3, but the thing is, whenever I think about Season a lot, it's mainly after Season 3 or maybe Season 4. So every time I think of the Fairy OddParents' Season a lot, it's after Season 5, including the introduction of Poof. To point this out, they reintroduced the Endman when it comes to the packets that Jimmy made in the beginning of the finale, and they were planning to have them return in order to have a different twist when it comes to Carla mixing up the packets. And to tell you the truth, even though that I have little plans on reviewing the Endman episodes, the way I see it, it really feels like that they were planning on having them being reintroduced in Season 4. And to be perfectly real with you, I would be interested into seeing that, judging of how they handled the execution of that much more better. Now, I am fully aware that the Fairy OddParents did have a superhero episode involving the characters that Timmy was around in school, which I will admit it's good on its own, but as far as I'm concerned, judging of how they would probably mess it up in the later seasons, which I'm not sure if they did make a sequel towards that episode, but if they did, then I'm pretty sure that it wouldn't have a direction, and just mainly for white noise, and that's basically the majority of when Loser's Attack is. If it wasn't obvious enough, the Fairy OddParents episode is white noise. In the earlier seasons, I would have seen these characters more of a threat and actually taking the situation seriously, despite the jokes that I'm not really a fan of. But every time I watch this and seeing how Crocker is portrayed despite being a fan favorite, it kind of sums up that if they allow him to be mostly suspicious on Timmy having fairies like he did in the past, they would probably have him being so overreacting when it comes to his interactions with Floop. And judging of how that they made an episode involving the Fairy OddParents interacting with Timmy's parents, despite the fact that they throw the wars out the window, sums up a lot that they just throw every continuity out the window for the sake of this episode to work. Whenever I watch this episode, it doesn't even feel like it's an episode from seasons 1 through 5. It just really feels white noise at most, and that's what most SpongeBob episodes were when this show was airing at the time. And trust me when I say this, is that when Nickelodeon treats those shows as white noise when it comes to the predicament that the Fairly Odd Parents were in, with it being in so much seasonal watts before the Loud House came out, I would rather sit through the Leo seasons of the Loud House over the Fairly Odd Parents, because to tell you the truth, the Loud House, even in its Leo seasons, aren't really white noise in comparison to the Leo seasons of the Fairly Odd Parents. And just by seeing this moment of Timmy going after Trixie, despite the fact that Crocker is being dressed as Trixie, which is so obvious to Timmy that it's not Trixie, even though that he could care less. This is obviously way worse than any of the moments where the Loud House characters are dressing up in disguise, which people just do not see the difference whatsoever. That's how much that this episode is so weaker and more white noise in comparison to the later seasons of the Loud House. I would talk about the other characters like Floop and Dark Laser, but the thing is, judging of how that they introduce new characters, and that includes Floop, it sums up everything that they just don't know how to handle these types of characters, and just seeing Floop in this instead of Anti-Cosmo, to tell you the truth, would you rather want to see Crocker interact with Anti-Cosmo and even Anti-Wanda? That would have been an interesting premise for what they can do, but judging of how that they just went to Anti-Floop, it doesn't make me convinced that though improving Floop's antagonist levels, it just makes me think that they should have done the old characters in order to do an interesting direction for the sake of having this episode stand out on its own. Granted, it won't fix everything, but for me personally, it sums up everything that they just don't take this episode seriously. See, this is one of the reasons onto why I take an episode or special seriously, judging of how they're executed in order to make me feel entertained, because I can sit through the finale of Jimmy Neutron multiple times if I wanted to, despite being double the length in comparison to the Fairly Odd Parents episode, because there is a subplot in this where T, who were part of the Space Bandits, ended up becoming a protagonist with the good guys. And to tell you the truth, with the direction of what they would have taken involving this, I honestly don't mind it at all, and it's much more better than anything that what When Losers Attack accomplished. With the amount of antagonists in this finale, seeing the Space Bandits being good guys, even though it may be off-putting, to tell you the truth, it's nowhere near as bad as anything of what the Fairly Odd Parents did in the later seasons, judging of how that the Space Bandits themselves, even though that they may have a backstory, if you ask me, every other backstory involving the antagonists doesn't need to be interesting, in the quote of Gibby from the final episodes of iCarly. Granted, it's just story in general, but it would also include the backstory that people need information of. To be honest, I'm not a fan of the Space Bandits, but if anything, I would rather watch a season 4 episode centering around them than anything involving the later seasons of the Fairly Odd Parents. And even though I've been saying that quite a lot of times in this, that just sums up of how there was so much potential in this, and it will probably have a conclusion while the Fairly Odd Parents is being favored more than Jimmy Neutron, judging of how in the Power Hours 2 and 3 have the Fairly Odd Parents writers in favor of the Jimmy Neutron writers. I'm not sure if that would have been the case if DNA Productions did stay in business, but every time I look at the Fairly Odd Parents episode along the Power Hours 2 and 3, despite enjoying 2 the most out of all the Power Hours, they're showing way too much favoritism towards the Fairly Odd Parents, especially since that the Fairly Odd Parents was about to come to an end around the same time as Jimmy Neutron came to an end in 2006. Even though that I've been holding off the information involving the 4th member of losers for way too long, but judging of how Timmy's father ended up becoming a fourth Nemo towards the end of the episode sums up everything that the self-awareness from this has no shame whatsoever, and not the good kind. So let's get into Vicky, the character who is part of the title card of the episode, only appears in the final 7 minutes of the episode itself. This just sums up everything that there is no direction whatsoever, and they're throwing everything in the wall as possible, which sums up a lot that if they did this ideal earlier, they would have executed it much more better, and the interactions between the villains would have been much more better, which sums up a lot that the interactions in the Jimmy Neutron finale is 10 times better. In all of this, Vicky just mostly trains Dark Laser, Crocker, and Floop in order for her to join her team, and then when they failed, they kick her out, which, in all honesty, I really feel like that every time I look at this, they just clearly don't know what to do with Vicky after losing her multiple times, and they just clearly given up on her. I'm being really honest that the way I see it, the reason why they included her is mainly to advertise the episode more. Let's be totally honest that if any of you saw the promos of this episode where they have Vicky part of the group and they only use her towards the final 7 minutes of the episode, you would probably be a little bit disappointed if you wanted to see her being cooperative with the other antagonists, with only her having them being trained in the most vicious ways, and for her being kicked out towards the end, all because white noise, for the sake of white noise. I'm pretty sure that when people didn't see this episode as another jumping the shark, then they pretty much given up on this show, aside from the diehard fans, if they're willing to put up with anything that this show can throw at the wall. Let me be perfectly real that when you look into the finale of Jimmy Neutron, and if it manages to go on forever, which I hope it wouldn't be the case, they wouldn't be able to do anything involving what this show has done when it comes to continuing non-stop seasonal watch, to the point that I've seen a lot worse seasonal watch that include Fairly OddParents, that I'm pretty sure that Jimmy Neutron never went into seasonal watch to begin with, no matter what people say otherwise. I've gone this long by not talking about the protagonists in Jimmy Neutron, mainly Cindy, Libby, Sheen, Carl, and Jimmy, but the thing is, if you really compare them to Timmy and the other characters, Cosmo, Wanda, and Poof, it sums up a lot that there's a huge difference on how the writing in Jimmy Neutron has more structured in comparison to the Fairly OddParents episode. Mainly the fact that I can actually take these characters seriously, while in the Fairly OddParents, not even close. Maybe I would've in the earlier seasons, but not in seasons 6 through 10. They don't really have much of a goal other than stopping the bad guys, similar to Timmy and the other characters. But judging of how that they really wanted this finale to be mainly memorable for the callbacks and whatnot, it really gave me the impression that they are literally just saying up of what season 4 was going to end up becoming when it comes to the development of the 5 characters. And since that every time I look at this finale as the finale of Jimmy Neutron and in season 3, if you do not qualify the Nickelodeon airing the episodes out of order, it really gave me the impression that they're building up into something in season 4. There's this one conversation between Libby and Cindy on the fact that the reason they're going is not only because they got nothing else to do, but they're in love with Jimmy and Sheen, mainly Libby to Sheen and Cindy to Jimmy, which sums up of how the 4th season would have a change of pace and direction when it comes to the characters. Here's something that really made me appreciate Jimmy Neutron, is that even though that the Very Odd Parents doesn't need to be like Jimmy Neutron when it comes to the earlier seasons, you can still see that there is some sort of direction in Jimmy Neutron that you would really appreciate a lot more. And with the directions that the Very Odd Parents had when it comes to the earlier seasons, you can really appreciate what they're trying to do. But keep in mind, once you watch the later seasons, it really makes the majority of the earlier seasons feel worthless at most. If it's anything that the newer seasons of the Very Odd Parents show me, is the fact that the Jimmy Neutron lore in the Very Odd Parents when it comes to the crossovers doesn't really exist whatsoever, which is not only sad, but it kind of sums up on how Nickelodeon favors the Very Odd Parents more than Jimmy Neutron, with Jimmy Neutron possibly being 3rd to 4th place if you want to include the Rugrats that were coming to an end, which is why I said 3rd or 4th place. Bottom line is that whenever I look at episodes of When Losers Attack or any other Very Odd Parents in the later seasons, it's no surprise that what we've seen in the Very Odd Parents are just going to contradict the lore and morals or anything else in the earlier seasons, to the point that it just makes everything in the past feel worthless and mostly an afterthought. You can say that the crossover between Jimmy and Timmy is something that you should never left out because of how huge it was back then, and I'm willing to believe people's beliefs as someone who actually enjoyed the Power Hours, mainly 1 and 2, but not really 3. But at the same time, whenever you look at the later seasons, it's just difficult to separate that from the crossovers. I know people usually do that, but not for me. It's not possible. Even if episodic shows is something that people need to learn, that shows like the Very Odd Parents isn't meant to be taken seriously, but when it comes to pent-up frustration when it comes to the later seasons, as someone who felt that when this show was airing in the early 2010s, which is after the classic Nicktoons came to an end, which includes Jimmy Neutron, Jimmy really felt like Timmy's old friend that moved on its own, while Timmy is basically on loop because he can't be able to control his life. Which, it's no surprise that Timmy's life is way more difficult for him to actually find enjoyment without his Very Odd Parents, but if Jimmy, despite his show coming to an end, can be able to have a future that didn't put him on loop, then it kind of sums up that Jimmy had a successful future while Timmy ended up making a secret wish involving him being unaged without anyone knowing for the next 50 years. For the longest time, that episode really irked me the wrong way, but after 12 or 13 years, that episode sums up the nature of Timmy's character in comparison to Jimmy's character. Whenever I look at the ending of League of Villains, where everyone, including the Space Bandits, return to Retroville, while the League of Villains are stuck in the Cretaceous era, it really feels like an ending that took itself seriously, that would lead up to something bigger when it comes to the planned Season 4. But when it comes to the Very Odd Parents, you wanna know what the climax is? After Cosmo and Wanda got their powers back, they wish for Timmy's wish, which consists of the losers turning into Timmy clones, which leads to them shooting each other. I would give this scene credit on having the Timmy clones act the same ways as the losers' counterparts, but at the same time for how the opening of the episode showcases of what's going to happen towards the end, and with this being lackluster, it sums up that they done way more better climaxes than this in the past. As if it wasn't enough, with this episode showcasing the white noise of the Fairly OddParents, they made a sequel towards this episode, which is only 11 minutes long in season 10, but considering that that's around the time, well, the show had jumped their final sharks, I'm pretty sure that it's better off not talking about that episode, considering that if there was going to be a season 4 of Jimmy Neutron, that sequel of the League of Villains will have beaten that episode from season 10 from the Fairly OddParents in a clean sweep. As if it wasn't enough to see more potential in Jimmy Neutron than the Fairly OddParents, the subplot centering around Hugh and Judy going into their son's lab for the first time, even though that Hugh went into his son's lab in the past. It's honestly interesting that this will have been foreshadowing of Cindy, Libby, and Betty having an episode of season 4 witnessing Jimmy's lab fully for the first time, rather than being invited from time to time, or aside from Betty. Even though that this led to Hugh pressing buttons involving Jimmy's wormhole generator that led to them in the Cretaceous era, I only felt like that these types of ideas were only there for the sake of having more plot ideas involving Judy and Hugh in season 4, considering they have less knowledge of in comparison to the other elements from this show. But if you ask me, if I have more knowledge involving Judy and Hugh in this, more than anything else from the Fairly OddParents episode, which sums up everything, I don't think I need to drag this video out longer than it needed to be, because the only problem that I have involving the League of Villains special is the love potion that affected Beautiful Gorgeous and the Jugman, which really made me cringe. But if it's worth sitting through this cringe moment over the white noise of the Fairly OddParents, then it's really saying something that I at least respect what the Jimmy Neutron finale did in comparison to the Fairly OddParents episode. Because if we ended up having white noise in the Jimmy Neutron episode, which is gonna be a lot worse if it had 44 minutes rather than 22 minutes, then I would say that this moment alone would have made me cringe a lot more worse. But it made me see something different in Jimmy Neutron in comparison to the Fairly OddParents episode, which there was a reason on to why the love potion was put into effect in this. But yeah, this was my comparison video of Jimmy Neutron's The League of Villains and the Fairly OddParents when Lucy's attack, and it's really obvious on which is the superior over the other. But to be fair, the Fairly OddParents episode isn't one of the worst Fairly OddParents episodes that I've sit through. It may be full of white noise, but at the same time, I would rather sit through this episode rather than the worst episodes of the Fairly OddParents. There was a reason on to why that this isn't Cartoon Crisis 3 material, judging of how I've went through way more wars involving the Fairly OddParents episodes in the past. The problem is that despite going through white noise, I would probably be really bored out of it and rather stick to the Jimmy Neutron episode or special, even with it being 22 minutes longer than this. The only thing that I got from this video alone after coming up with it recently is I might compare the Jimmy Neutron Endman episode to the Fairly OddParents superhero episode that happened in seasons 1 through 5. Because to be perfectly real with you, if you want to see a positive review or video involving me talking about the Fairly OddParents, that's literally the closest I can think of. But then again, I could be considering on reviewing the third Timmy and Jimmy Power Hour as a Cartoon Crisis 3 project in the future, but it depends on how I feel after Subplots 5 Steven Universe Marathon comes to an end. Or maybe in 2025. So anyway, with Subplots 5 Steven Universe Marathon arriving this month, I'm gonna be taking a break from Jimmy Neutron in the meantime. I'm giving the League of Villains a 7.5 out of 10, while the Very OddParents, when loses attack, gets a 4.5 out of 10.